My name's David Burns and I'm the convener of Western Sydney Moving. So welcome this morning. Before we start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on where I live, which is the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people online today. So this is our 15th community of practice, which is really great, but it's our first one as a health promotion charity. So that's quite a milestone for us. So that's great to recognise. Not easy becoming a charity, but we're very excited about the future. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to put who you are in your chat and what lands you're coming from today and where you work, then that would be fantastic. You're not obliged to, but that's just an invitation. The format today is I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of where we're at with Western Sydney Moving and an update. And then we've got a terrific guest speaker here today with Professor Melanie Ding from Sydney University, who's going to talk about active research versus an inactive population, an honest reflection by a physical activity researcher. So really looking forward to that. And then we'll have the opportunity to ask Melody some questions. And then, as always, at the end, we've got an opportunity to share and collaborate and connect across the system of Western Sydney. So a bit of an update for Western Sydney Moving. The symposium, well, we had that in November, was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for all those that attended. Some great energy. It was a real dream actually to launch the charity and also release the white paper which we co-authored with the Centre for Western Sydney at Western Sydney University. At the symposium there was some great presentations, a lot of interaction, but at the end we did a what's called a World Cafe, where we asked the system what a series of questions to help us as we progress. And the system really told us a few things really, but that strategic coordination across the system is needed, that there's a clear leadership vacuum of forging and maintaining connections across the system. There is a significant gap in the availability of data to inform evidence-based program and strategy, and the system needs to be mapped to find common goals, align advocacy and pool resources. So that was really helpful, and our board caught up for the first time last week. Our new board, that's Scott Walters, Laurie Maud, Lauren Nichols. Rifai couldn't be there, but we took on that feedback and we've developed that into a 12-month plan and a bit of a playbook, which we're going to share with you over the next month or so, of how we're going to kind of take this work on. So that was the symposium. Thank you for everybody attending. There is a wrap-up document if anybody's interested. In terms of advocacy and media, well, we've had some really good, the momentum's been building. So from the white paper and the launch of the charity, I've done a couple of radio interviews with ABC and 2GB, and we had an article in the ABC News, which is fantastic. And myself and Professor Neil Perry, who quantified the cost of inactivity in Western Sydney at 1.5 billion, which is in the white paper. We were asked to go and present to Minister Park's office, which is health, and Minister Camper's office of sport as a joint briefing, and they invited the Ministry of Health and Western Sydney Local Health District, and we just discussed the progress and where we're up to, and gave them a bit of an update, just to continue that advocacy, and that was really well received. So we'll see what happens from that. We also had, and I'm learning all the time. So one of the ministers, the member for Liverpool, Charisma Caliander, spoke in New South Wales Parliament last week through something what we call a private member's statement. and actually discuss the white paper and the inactivity and inequity crisis. So that was really great to hear that we've actually, it's being discussed in New South Wales Parliament. So again, this is just building the momentum. So that was really great to see. One of the actions from the white paper was to develop local active partnerships, and we squeezed our first one in Liverpool in December, and we had 30 odd people attend from that local system. And we've got the next one on the next week, 27th of February, in person for 3 hours, where we bring in all the local networks, and we're going to progress at a place-based level, which is community-led. And a couple of guest speakers on there are Miss Charisma Kalianda MP, member for Liverpool, and also Nick Pengley, who's on the call today from Liverpool Council, talking about what council's doing. So that's really great. And I think the final thing is we've provisionally locked in the symposium date for later this year. We're bringing it forward a month, so we're looking at the 30th of October in Penrith at Western Sydney Conference Centre. So I'll put a provisional invite out there for you. If anybody knows of any other conferences happening around that time, please let me know, because we don't want to duplicate. That's a bit of an update of where we're at with our movement for movement. So I'll pause there, and the real star today is Melanie Ding. So Professor Melanie Ding, thank you for joining us today. If you just want to try and put up your presentation, please, while I just give a little bit of overview of your bio, which is absolutely huge and would take us all the session, I think, to do it justice. But Professor Melanie Ding's at the Sydney School of Public Health at Sydney University, and has published over 200 papers, and I think citations around 18,000, but is a real world leader around physical activity research. And we're so privileged to have her today to talk about some honest reflections by a physical activity researcher. So I'll hand over to you, Melody, and if anybody has any questions, please hold them, write them down, and then we'll give you the opportunity with putting your hand up after Melody has spoke. Over to you, Melody.
Thank you very much, David, for inviting. Can everyone hear me okay? Give me a thumb up. Fantastic. I would also like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose land I stand on today at the University of Sydney. When David invited me to give this talk, I asked him, am I allowed to be super honest or maybe even provocative? And he said, yes, go ahead. So I'm doing a little bit experiment here, because this is probably going to be one of the most provocative talks that I've given so far. And if there's any, if you find it controversial, I think that is meant to be, because I really want this to generate conversations and discussion, and possibly disagreement. That's all part of our learning. And today I'm coming from an academic's point of view, because as David has mentioned, I'm a researcher. I'm the one who's working on the evidence generation and of the story. And I have been scrolling through the many pages of participants, and I've seen some familiar faces of old friends. I've seen new friends, and connections it's yet to make. And I think this is probably by far the most mixed audience I've given talk to, because usually I tend to give talks at pure academic or pure public audience. So what I plan to do today is to kind of show you the perspective from the researcher's point of view, the fact that we really try to connect with decision makers, that we want to make real world impact, but there's challenges there that we're experiencing as well. So I think that just take this as a little bit of reflection from our end, and potentially call for an action or call for changes in the systems, which we can discuss later on after my presentation. So last weekend, I was in the beautiful Lake Macquarie area. I don't know if anyone is from here. I brought my visiting father there, for beautiful hikes and things like that. But because I don't have Telstra, and most of the time when I was hiking, I actually didn't get signal. Actually, some of the time when I'm driving, I didn't get signals. And it really made me wonder, I just thought that we have done so much in terms of mapping every, corner of the world and store it in this, amazing virtual space of, all the map data, all the information. But it just takes one hill to block that signal. And when there's no signal, all of that information is nothing. I was running around in circle. At some point, I was going back and forth in one section, not knowing how to, like, which turn to take. And I kind of had a moment and thinking about the work we do as researchers. We have generated so much evidence that probably really takes significant storage space to put in the same place. But oftentimes the signal is missing or it's blocked by something, so that a lot of the evidence has not really been used towards providing a direction to where we're going. Therefore, sometimes I feel like we're running around in circles. So I just did a really quick search to kind of explain how much evidence we have been really generating. And we usually date the start of the physical activity field in 1953. That's when Jerry Morris did the first famous London bus study that compared the coronary heart disease risk of the bus conductors and the bus drivers, and found that despite pretty much working on the same bus and having the same socioeconomic background, the bus conductors have much lower coronary heart disease risk. And that's the first time when in a scientific paper that link between physical activity and the health outcome was published. So since then, this is, 60 years later, just the articles that has physical activity in the title and abstract in PubMed alone is more than 63,000. So even if we're like really fast readers, I can swear that none of us can read all of these papers in our lifetime, right? So it's a very active research field. In fact, Australia is considered either the number one or the number two most research active country defined by publications per capita and on the physical activity topic in the world. But what we're dealing in reality is that we're constantly bombarded by these kind of headlines over and over again about the world population not being active enough, about the Australians not being active enough. And the recent WHO update of global physical activity prevalence published in Lancet Public Health in 2024 show that Australia is actually one of the countries that is not on track to meet the relative reduction of 15% by 2030, which we refer to as the Global Action Plan for Physical Activity target. So we're not meeting that target, despite of all the research we're doing, as the global community and as the Australian research communities alone. And especially among Australian children, we're doing really horribly. And I think among the world ranking systems that we constantly get D minus for, in terms of the physical activity, environment, and policies for young people. And I just want to give a shout out to the work that my colleague Bing, who's online today as well, led in 2 years ago. So we're looking at New South Wales population health survey to see how physical activity has projected over time and how that change differ by socioeconomic status has been over time. So what we see in New South Wales is that physical inactivity, this is something that we want to reduce. So the lower, the better. Physical inactivity has indeed reduced over time, but the cost of that is widening inequality by education, by area level deprivation and remoteness. So even when we had good news, there's often like a negative side of the story. So I think we really need to reflect as the research community together what could we do better to bridge the gap between active research and inactive population? So this is research my colleague Karen Lee led, published also about 2 years ago, because we're trying to understand this question. Why is it that we're publishing so much and nothing happened? And the number one question there is, what kind of papers are we publishing? So in this study, Karen and team took a random sample of the papers published in the world during this period of 2008 to 2009, 13 to 14, and 17 to 18, really trying to thematically code these papers in terms of what topics areas they cover. And what they found, which is not the first time actually, this is something, a replication from the earlier paper, but the finding has not changed. Number one, number two topics of physical activity research has been correlates and determinants. So it's very correlational research, looking at, what kind of people are more likely to be active and what kind of people are less likely, but there's no causal inference whatsoever. So we're still kind of just finding the same thing, repeating the same thing. And the other big topic has always been the health benefits of physical activity. So we've published, thousands and thousands of papers in this space. And I think we get to the point that we can walk on the street, we can ask any random people, they would know that physical activity is good for you. But, that is not necessarily translated into being more physically active. So in a way, the question is, do we need more research, at least this much research on physical activity and health outcomes, why we need to be more active? And what kind of people are active and inactive? Because we're finding the same thing. We keep on finding those of lower socioeconomic status, those who are more disadvantaged, those who don't have access to be physically inactive. But the kind of research we really need, the translational research, the implementation and scaling up research and policy research, continue to be a very, very small minorities of the overall research evidence generated. Usually we're looking at about 3% globally. So somehow there's a disconnect between the research generated and the research the world actually needs. So I often think about this analogy. I find it really funny. As a researcher, we often conclude a paper with more research is needed. So in a way, we're in this perpetuating research generation cycle that we publish more papers so that we can create ourselves more jobs, so publish more papers later on. It's like those monsters in mythology where you cut off one head, two heads grow up. So the researchable topics keep on growing over time. So I think that is an opportunity for me to share some behind the scene insights about the research world. And I have to give disclaimer and warning that this following conversation might include cynical and grumpy comments, and which I think, I've been in the research field long enough to feel that frustration. And I think a lot of you working in practice, working in policy, probably have your moments as well. And maybe we can all share about these at the end of our conversation to see how we can work better together. So unfortunately, the research world has become more and more competitive. Each researcher has been reduced to a sheer metrics or multiple metrics that define our worth in this super competitive world. And writing a paper has often been deviated from the original purpose of scientific inquiries or societal impact to paper reproduction line or paper production factories. And the widely available data sources like UK Biobank and NHANES and BRFSS, those studies have been really helpful in shaping our understandings about, some initial topics, but it has really been mined to the level that a lot of researchers go there as the quickest way to publish a paper, because we all need papers to have our jobs, get funding, get promoted, or by the research definition, be worthwhile. So what we often observe in the physical activity field, I'm just using the health outcomes of physical activity, then, observational epidemiological studies as an example, imagining how many ways we can conceptualize physical activity. There's, by intensity, we have moderate, vigorous, light, very vigorous, we have strength training, balance, walking. And then by domain, we have occupation, leisure time. By type, we have, cycling, and there's sedentary behavior, standing. There's so many ways that we can conceptualize physical activity. And there's so many outcomes that you can choose that is freely available in these data sets. So oftentimes research endeavor has become, let's just spin a wheel and see which one can be linked to which one. And sometimes it's something we already know for decades. Other times there's probably no likely plausible connections and no one has done that before, but that's another paper. And that's a paper on a topic that is novel because no one has done that before. So I've seen this all the time as someone who does epidemiological research. It is unfortunately the reality that is forced by the system. And what happens is oftentimes that the research trends start to kind of recycle and become a bit of, running around in circles. And what we actually really gain as a research community, considering all these hours put into writing this paper together, might not be proportional to the actual knowledge gained or useful information generated for practice. And as a result, we create a lot of silos as well. And again, this is often forced by the system. For example, the NHMRC investigator grant, which is like the grant that we all aim for as health and medical researchers. They require you to describe your standing of the field. And as a reviewer of these grants and as an applicant myself, what I've often observed is that in order to claim that you are kind of the top of a mountain of a field, the field has become smaller and smaller. And for someone like me who has a very broad research areas, I really find it that I struggle in writing narratives because I can't claim that I invented this concept and this is what I do and this is I'm a top expert in this one particular area because I'm covering a lot of space and I feel like repeatedly kind of penalized in that system versus when we really carve out the really small niche strategically, then you can really easily claim that you're the king of the niche that you're working. And I think that makes it easier for grant assessment and to decide who is excellent and who is not. But what is really not helpful is it's actually for the field to develop, for us to work together and for us to go beyond our niche. So that's the struggle I have as the researchers on one end and real world practice by means of communities, policies, decision makers. I feel this disconnect, and sometimes we just don't know how to reach the other end. Or let me just say it in an honest way, how to work together, do the kind of research I want to do to mend this bridge while keeping my job at the same time, being in this very competitive academic world. So I'm sharing a couple of my reflections for, I'm now kind of switching onto a positive note now because I think just now it was like a lot of complaining. And now I'm trying to give a little bit more insights on how to do it, kind of the research that I think we need for real world impact. But I have to say that this disclaimer for this kind of research is probably kind of guarantee for not as much productivity on paper as the kind of research I just showed. So, this is the research I think the real world needs, but this is also research that could potentially sink a researcher's career in this current environment. So I'm just being very honest here. Number one, I think it's really important for us to think about why people engage in physical activity. Coming from the health and medical research background, we keep on having this, I guess, illusion that people become physically active or people engage in physical activity because of health. So we need to sell the health message. But the reality is physical activity is by nature aversive to a lot of people, and health outcomes tend to be very delayed. So if you want to get a 30-year-old couch potato off the couch to do something that he or she actually might not enjoy doing, and tell this person that in 30 years you reduce your heart disease risk by 30%, that's probably not the most convincing message to sell. And I think it's really interesting that I found this article that, really interviewed and surveyed older adults who play sports and why they do so. If we really kind of stand from a very health-centric ground, and we probably expect that everyone is playing sports because they want to be healthy. But in fact, health is just one of the minor reasons, but most of the reasons here come from a sense of community, the social rewards, the relationships, or even just showing that I could still do this when I'm at this age. So this is something I think we need to capitalize in more than purely selling the health message in terms of promoting population physical activity. And the same thing we found with children. Imagine if we, go from a very nerdy public health researcher's point of view, and we can tell children that, hey, if you commute actively to school, you're likely to grow up to be a healthy adult. And as a healthy adult, in 60 years, you reduce your chronic disease risk by X, Y, Z. But the reality is that's not the primary motivation, if at all, why children chose to commute actively. There's a lot of the sensory experience. There's a lot of the interactions with the environment. There's a lot of the social elements that they want to do this with their friends. They want to, fit in. And I think these are the things that is so under-researched, probably because it's hard to research and it's hard to get it published in a good journal. This is my personal reflection. I often think about what it means for me to be active. And to me, being active, health is probably not a primary concern. To me, it's a sense of, sharing what I love with the people I love, and a sense of freedom, artistry, and just having fun. And that's what drives me. It's not that I think about my heart disease risk in 30 years. And I think we really need to capitalize what matters more for the people and actually measure these, because a lot of these outcomes, sure, they're harder to measure than heart disease risk, but we need to capitalize these outcomes, measure them, evaluate them so that we can, find more channels to promote physical activity effectively. And number two, I think it's important for us to think about who to engage in promoting physical activity. As I already mentioned, I think this is definitely not the sole business of the health sector, because health might not be the primary reason why people are active. In fact, we have a good guidebook in the physical activity field called the 8 Best Investment for Physical Activity. So these are the ones that are outlined here. So these have been around in our field for probably close to 2 decades now. And these involve the school programs, active transport, urban planning. And if you look down through this 8 best investments, there's only one that is directly related to health, which is the healthcare sector. And in fact, that is the area that has the least evidence, least convincing evidence compared with all the other investments that we can put forward for physical activity. So that really makes us, working in public health, working in the health research field, to rethink about, perhaps we we're not alone here. Perhaps we should get rid of our ego and think that we can do this and we can do this all on our own. So I have, start to analyze the best investment a little bit and think about the sectors that we can involve for each of the best investment. For example, for whole of school program, of course, we involve education. But if the whole of school program also involves active travel to school, maybe we need to also involve the transportation and planning sectors. And, there's also the sport and recreations. We have potentially public and private sectors for workplaces. There's really a lot of sectors that could all work together to make it easier for us, to make it less resistant for us to be active. And I think really important aspects for us to think about, it goes back to the first point I made, is that we need to measure the right thing. Of course, it's important that we measure, heart disease risk, premature death that have been averted as a result of physical inactivity, can be averted as a result of physical inactivity. There's other important outcomes that really matters for the partnering sectors involved. For example, we work with education, then we need to think about academic performance, personal development, and well-being of the children. If we work with urban design transportation, we have to think about transportation efficiency, livability, economic impact, and various other aspects. As researchers, we really need to think about broadening our view about the benefits of physical activity so that we can measure the right benefits for the right sectors who we want to partner in this endeavor. So my personal reflection number 2, physical activity can be promoted in all sectors. It doesn't have to be health at the center. And we need to measure the right outcomes to put the wind on their sails. And number 3, and my final reflection here, is about addressing upstream systemic drivers. A very typical naive physical activity interventions, again, I'm just being like overly critical of my academic friends here, and a lot of researchers not like that, but I'm just giving that kind of hypothetical example. We kind of come from the standpoint is that, we're going to tell people physical activity is really important, that it only takes 30 minutes a day, and you surely can add the 30 minutes into your day to be active. But what we often don't consider is what that person's situation is really like. Because to us, that 30 minutes really makes or breaks meeting physical activity guidelines, which is the utmost important thing for us as researchers. As individuals, we all have 24 hours a day, and we're juggling so many challenges. We're dealing with, social disadvantage, lack of access, competing priorities, working 3 jobs to put bread on the table, lacking physically activity promoting environments, not even know how, or not having the skills to start, not having social supports as we're surrounded by people who all need a little bit more from us to do the things that is important to them. So oftentimes when we consider this broad range of challenge, or just take a little bit of zoom out on someone's life, we realize that there's so much competing priorities and challenges that we often naively assume are not there because we think physical activity is important. They must think physical activity is important. And then we add the more global challenges we're dealing with right now that just makes an active, healthier lifestyle harder, makes pursuing well-being physically and mentally harder. So we're dealing with a very complex system here, and we can't think linearly as we have been doing for many decades as the primary kind of academic way of thinking. So I want to just quickly introduce systems thinking here. I know that systems thinking has been at the heart of Western Sydney Move from the start, and I really applaud you for that. And for those of you who are not as familiar with system thinking, I'll just give you a quick guide in terms of, why I think that it stands out from other perspective. Because oftentimes a behavior or a condition or a social problem is affected by a broad range of interconnecting factors. They're somehow interrelated to each other. And sometimes when we provide a simple solution to these kind of complex problems, which we often call wicked problems, we might create more problems than we can solve because they're so interlinked. And what we have often seen in reality is physical activity interventions without addressing systems often tend to exacerbate socioeconomic inequalities because it reaches the part of the population where resources are more readily accessible to them, where skills are already there. So if we don't consider the system overall, we tend to, create unintended consequences like what I just mentioned. So the trade-off and unintended consequences are really hard to study with our, conventional linear thinking approach. So system thinking and system approaches are designed for solving wicked problems. And I think physical inactivity of the population, social inequality, they're the classic examples of wicked problems. And I just want to kind of showcase a little bit of what we have been doing at ASAPA Plus, so Australian system approach for physical activity. And David was actually invited to our first workshop where we get different sectors together. We get academic colleagues, we've got policymakers from the state and city levels, we've got a politician even, and across different sectors, education, urban planning, transportation, sports, for us to really think about what are the drivers and barriers to physical activity in New South Wales for adults and children. So it was a very fun interactive process where we did a lot of brain dump, as you can see from this post-it. It was absolutely a nightmare for us to convert these post-its into some sort of map that we start to really understand the connections across these factors. So the fun thing about and one of the benefits of using this kind of participatory system mapping is that we can get to what we so-called leverage, which is often a point that we, by intervening that, we can intervene multiple pathways to physical activity. For example, here we identify the car culture as an important leverage for our system mapping process for why we're not active enough. We access aspects of our urban environment, like land use mix, as an important leverage. Yes, very easy to solve, right? The car dependent culture, but at least it get us to consider, how each factor is related to each other and how we can start to address the priority area. And then I'm just one more thing here. We're actually now at the stage that we're putting parameters into our maps and start to test out different scenarios and for goal setting at the population level. Hopefully next year or, later this year, I could share some of that with you because they're making good progress. Shout out to my team, Tracy, Susan, being there all online. It's a lot of hard work for all of us. But, this is all really hard research. And my personal reflection number 3 is that, we have to really start to consider changes within the system, not in an isolated environment. We need to acknowledge the complexity. And in this battle of physical activity, we have more allies than we think. And that's what I mentioned earlier. So basically, to summarize the 3 points I mentioned where I think more research should happen, I can summarize it as co-produce, co-benefits, and systems, because we need to engage across sectors outside of academia and work across, private and public sector decision makers, policymakers, practitioners for the same mission that we're aiming for together. And it's important for us to measure co-benefits because, again, when we engage with different sectors, we have to put wing on their sail, and we need to look into the systems together. It all sounds really blue sky and important, and I can say that it's extremely hard to get funded from an academic point of view. And the last 2, 3 years of engaging in this kind of research has been my least productive research years. So because it is not the typical quick and dirty research that we can do, that we get metrics, that we get rewarded with grants. So I feel like a lot of these changes in the direction of my research is actually at my personal cost. And now I'm worried about, because of this decision I made, will I be successful enough to get the next grant so that I can continue to do the kind of research that I'm passionate about? I'm just being very honest here. So I want to show you some examples that I think were very proud of as a group that we did together. So we did a giant systematic review that included more than 80 papers on active travel intervention. It took us more than 2 years because of the various coding. It's very complicated. So we tried to really do a proof of concept project for us to, show decision makers that, hey, if you invest in active travel, which, by the way, we're really horrible at, because the global recommendation for the amount of transportation budget that should be spent on active travel is 20%. In Australia, it's less than 2%. So we're really not there. But perhaps there's more co-benefits that we can leverage that previously we haven't thought about. So, oh yeah, by the way, we have developed infographics if any of you is interested in using this information to advocate for active travel investment. And again, shout out to Tracy, her idea and her infographics. And what we found is that there is so much more to active travel than health. There is, better safety, better transport efficiency and transport quality, economic gain for the region, and reduced cost of transportations, environmental benefits in terms of reduced noise, air pollutions, and CO2 emissions, and social benefits in terms of better social capital. So there's a lot of benefits we can harness for active travel. And another showcase example of my colleague Kat Owen's research on sports participation and academic outcomes, and that really gained a lot of traction by the media. I have literally heard, when I'm on the bus, when I'm like walking past cafe, overhearing parents talking to each other saying, hey, have you seen this news that was reported in the ABC that maybe I should let my daughter keep on rowing, rather than focusing too much more academia, which is what I've been trying to do. So I'm really shout out to Kat here for producing such meaningful research that is a perfect example of capitalizing on the outcomes that are not typical for health researchers. But the other side of the story, we really struggle to get this piece of evidence published because the typical, go-to journals that have more of a health niche focus are not interested in this. And again, as an academic researcher, we are often penalized for not necessarily published in our tier 1 journals. But I'm proud of what Kat has done and show the example that the impact in the real world might not be the same as the academic rewards that we traditionally measure. Finally, I want to close with something that we have proposed as mission-oriented research, which I think pretty much summarizes up what Western Sydney Move does. So, David, sorry for embarrassing you here, but I think this is the way we need to go as the research community and the rest of our allies here who share the same grand mission for creating an active, more equitable world. So we need to identify partnerships, sometimes outside of our usual suspects. We need to map out the stakeholders and align our interests together, stimulate collaborations and share agendas, and really engage in ongoing cross-sectoral advocacy towards the shared goal. And in terms of the research aspects, we need to measure what matters. We need to measure what matters to our research partners, like what I mentioned, the co-benefits. And I think it's really important to add the importance of economic evaluations here as well, because at the end of the day, a lot of the decisions gets down to the dollars. And in the meantime, we really must lose side of equity. And I think that's, again, what I want to shout out to Western Sydney Move. You're really working in a disadvantaged area in Sydney. And I think that's really, really important. A lot of the evidence has been generated for the privileged and used by the privileged. So it's really important for us to think about the evidence gaps before new research is being done, to think about who is likely to benefit from the interventions and how, and really incorporate inequality into the evaluation process. For example, going back to one of the piece of evidence that I presented, if we only look at population level physical activity, you could see that we're making good progress in New South Wales. But unless we really evaluate inequality intentionally, we might miss the picture completely. So we need to really constantly keep equity in the front of our mind. So I put the citation here if you're interested in accessing that article. And yeah, I hope, through more discussion in terms of changing the funding systems and the structural and systems barrier, we can get the GPS to constantly have signal so that we're producing the right research for something that is meaningful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melody. That was absolutely terrific. And yeah, really appreciate your vulnerability and openness. That really came through, really strong. So I just want you to, acknowledge that we really appreciate that. And yeah, in this room, we're hoping that we can have open dialogue and conversations as we're all trying to get more people to move. And I loved how you brought your own reflections into it as well, your personal reflections. So thank you. But I want to open it up to the group for any questions. And yeah, if you just put your hand up. So Joanne, I'll come to you straight away.
Thank you. Thank you, Melody. I used to be an academic. I ran away screaming, so I understand your pain. And I was in education too, and now I'm in health. One of the things that I think is really important as well to look at in terms of that equity mix is also the quality of the sports and the sports participation that is actually being offered. And I think that is sometimes missed in the conversation too. So it's not always about access, but it's actually about the quality of what's on offer. And a lot of the sports organisations that offer these team sports are run by volunteers, which is amazing, and they do amazing work, but they're not trained. They're not trained to work with kids with disabilities. They're not trained to work with kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. When we look at Western Sydney, we're looking at a population of young children who have complex range of needs, and your average mum or dad who are trying their best don't always work with those kids the best that they could. So it's no fault on the volunteers, but if we're looking at it from a systemic point of view, when we look at access, we have to look at the quality of what is being offered to those young people, because it can be actually a significant disadvantage for children to be involved in some of these team sports. So I felt that in some, like, I really appreciated your presentation, but I felt like what was somewhat missing was that there was just, if we were engaged in team sport, or it's going to be 100% beneficial, and it's actually not. It's not always the case, because it is about that access. If there are only a certain number of teams, for example, and kids don't get in, younger and younger, there's these expectations for kids to perform at a high level, and they don't get into the soccer teams, they don't get into the netball teams because they're not good enough. So I think that's I think a very specific thing as well for Western Sydney when you're looking at a range of young people with complex needs.
I think that is an excellent point. I think that's an excellent project that we can do system mapping on, so that we identify what matters, what causes the differences in quality and the type of issues and unintended consequence that you just mentioned, being the selected one or the not selected one, the bullies, everything that could come as a result, or toxic masculinity, that could be unintended consequence of team sports. So I think that is a perfect opportunity to bring in that lens and actually identify what we need to measure, because we tend to measure access, which is easier, but quality is much harder to measure. So I think that just, what you mentioned, it just reinforces the point that we really need to measure what matters, and we really know what we need to measure. And I think before that, we kind of really need to look at each problem not from the black and white 100% versus 0% sort of dichotomy, but really look at the complexity. Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks for your question, Joanna. And what we're trying to do with West Sydney Moving is an interdisciplinary research agenda. So, would like to look at some of these as projects, but in a coordinated way. So I'm just going to go to Laurie, and then I'll come to you, Camilla, next.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Hope you can hear me. I'm just traveling in the Blue Mountains at the moment, but thanks, Melody. That was amazing and so refreshing to hear. As a marketer, I have been hugely critical of the disconnect between research, the ability of interpretation to industry and sectors. And something that David and the board and myself discussed last week was, our ability to help that interpretation. So really great to hear. My biggest question is, in all the research that you've seen in this space, what has dramatically, or what has been a shift or a change that you have seen, or is there no change to this research? Are we seeing the same thing again and again? Is there something changing that we need to be front and center of going into, probably the next few years ahead?
Are you talking about the research that is conducted that has changed?
Yeah.
The topic?
Yeah, exactly.
I think, again, I'm just being very upfront here. I think a lot of the research that we're doing, we're trying to answer old questions with more precise measures. One of the biggest things that we have seen in the physical activity field is that previously physical activity has been measured by questionnaires, because that's the best we had. And we know that humans are horrible at reporting how active they are, especially if we ask them for the minutes and intensity. And then with the widespread, wearable research that kind of allow us to look more into the details, which I think is really fun. This kind of research is very interesting. I do some of those as well. But, the ironic thing is that if we start to line up the more updated wearable evidence with our original questionnaire evidence, they're actually not that far off. Most of the research, most of the outcomes that are associated with physical activity are still associated. There might be slightly difference in, magnitude of association, purely because wearables have less, measurement biases usually. At the end of the day, I think the questions that we often lose sight on of the research community is why we're doing this piece of research. So I think that the wearable research is exploding at the moment, but I often, start to see this as some level of over-research, because we already know this, and now we've proved the concept that with wearable research, we're also seeing physical activity is important. Okay, let's get on with it. Let's promote physical activity. Let's engage policymakers rather than doing more of those, Yeah, so that's my very honest reflection. Yeah.
Yeah, great. No, again, refreshing to hear, because that's exactly my thoughts. I feel like we need to move away from what we continue to do. So thank you.
That's all right.
If there's any
Thank
gaps
you
you
so
see,
much.
we're happy to support you.
And the wearable research have unintended consequence as well, because the rich, the educated, the already health aware that wear it. So that's definitely not the solution for all.
Thank you. We've got 5 minutes left, and I know there's a few people that wanted to share some great stuff that's happening. But Camilla, just over to you, if you could just a Twitter length question. You just unmute.
Really, really support everything that you've said again. I look after all our adults exercise programs, and one of the things we were talking about in terms of research, the same things, is quite frustrating. I've been trying to get researchers to come and get reflective outcomes out of hundreds of participants, so we can use that in better campaigns, because most of these people, as you said, they come for social reasons, they come for social connection. How can we get more researchers engaged in? It's more qualitative, it's not quantitative in terms of the data, but I know it's outside what most of the funds go for, but maybe I can reach out to you and talk to you about that at some stage.
100%. I think we really need to rethink about our funding system, academic evaluation system. How do we encourage more of this partner research? I think, Australia is no better or worse than other countries in that space. It's really people do the research that gives them credits and funding. But, like the kind of research that I'm talking about, I'm passionate about here. I'm spending half of my time doing the same old research as well so that I can keep my job. So that's my reality, but really happy to continue to engage. I'm going to put my email here. I'm sure that David will be happy to share my email as well. And also in terms of, some of the studies that I talked about, any infographics that you want. We develop these. We really want them to be used. So, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thanks. Neil, if you're very quick, you can ask a question, and then I'll just open it up to any comments.
Thanks, David. Can I just check you can hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine.
It's really, really short question with a bit of a preface. So 10 years ago, there was an explosion in research around 10-second all-out maximal sprints for diabetes care and the benefits that brought. And I guess my question is, what's more important for physical activity? Is it that people do it or that people enjoy it? And have we kind of got an answer for that?
That is a short question, but I can't give you a short answer. Let me just give you a short answer this way. The only exercise or physical activity people can stick to is something that they enjoy. So we can't really force it. We can put them through a trial for 12 weeks and really force them to do it and show effects. And when the trial finish, if they don't enjoy what they do, they're going to go back and relapse to their old behavior. So I think we really need to help people find what they really enjoy doing.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Neil Gibson, for that one. All right, open to the group. Anybody got anything they'd like to share? What's happening? What do you need help with? Alana, over to you.
Thanks, David. I just wanted to quickly say that the health promotion team at Southwest Sydney Local Health District are partnering with the University of Wollongong in developing a co-designed family physical activity program. In doing that, we are inviting families that live in the Fairfield area to participate in this co-design workshop to let us know what kind of program fits them with a family-focused experience. All people need to do is help us recruit to people that work, live, or play in the Fairfield area and have children between the ages of 6 and 12. And we are offering bilingual community educators in Vietnamese and Arabic, so we're able to have both families from English, Vietnamese, and Arabic background. I'll send an email to David to circulate the flyer, but if anyone can help us with recruitment, that would be greatly appreciated. We're recruiting until the 5th of March for workshops in the middle of March. We're doing weekday and weekend options to accommodate families as much as possible. Any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thanks, Alana. Anyone else? Share.
Thanks, David, and thanks for inviting myself and Liam to the session today. And Melody, that was really a lot of the things you talked about were things that we've been looking at over the last 6 to 9 months. So it's nice to kind of hear the same thing from someone else and kind of like, focus on the key points that we've been looking at. Just a bit of context. Shay from HCF, so we're part of the innovation team, and our first kind of product we're bringing to market is a mobile app that helps people get active, get out of the house, and connect with people in their community. So kind of that social exercise aspect, which you kind of touched on as well, Melody. So it's we're launching end of March. We're really excited by it because it's free to use. It's open to every Australian to use, and we're really trying to encourage as many people to kind of set up groups on there, but also join groups and kind of get out there and kind of build up your physical activity, right? Because like you said, a lot of people don't meet those minimum guidelines. So we're very open to talking to people, partnering with organizations, and really trying to get the word out there and supporting people in meeting those guidelines and getting active and trying to bring on like fun activities as well. One thing is, like, we did a lot of research as well, and people hate the term exercise. They hate, like, the gym. They want to hear things like movement, activity. It's probably not foreign to a lot of people on the call, but the fun things where exercise is incidental are the things that those people that don't tend to get physically active are things that they would like to do. So we're trying to bring in fun activities as well. So if anyone's interested, feel free to reach out. And it's called Active Locals as well.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you.
Thanks,
we've nudged over, and so I've not done very well today with facilitating. I do apologise, but I always do want to respect people's time. So Charlene, I knew you had a question, but if we can forward that to everybody, if that's okay. I just wanted to kind of finalise just saying a big thank you to Professor Melanie Ding for your presentation and everybody jumping on today. I think we had our highest number. I think we clocked over 90 people at one point, and it just to reflect on that, that's practitioners, researchers and academics. This was a focused on research and academia, but that is a big part of the system where we need to we've got a great opportunity there in terms of evidence and mission orientated research, Melody, which I really like. So I just wanted to thank you all. We have got the Liverpool Local Active Partnership next Thursday at Lunia Community Centre. So if anybody's interested in coming along who hasn't got the meeting invite, we'd love to see you there as we try to build that local network to get more people active in Liverpool. Please reach out if you'd like to be interested, if you'd like to attend that. So on that, thank you so much. We'll be catching up in 8 weeks. So yes, just go well, stay active, and look after yourselves. Thank you very much for your attendance this morning. Take care, guys.
Thank you, everyone.